Sarah. My or she, her. I'm also a member of Spring, and I will be facilitating the discussion portion of our meeting tonight.
Before we get started, we'll begin with the Spring Solidarity Statement.
Spring members seek to be a part of the struggles against all forms of oppression and to learn from them. In this, we recognize the unique oppressions faced by systematically marginalized peoples and thus organize to offer a secure platform for them to center their struggles against oppression. We also recognize the particular responsibilities of individual members of our organization who do not face these same oppressions to work in solidarity and allyship with them.
Spring members recognize that Canada is a colonial state and an imperialist power that attacks and oppresses those within and without its borders. As an organization, we oppose Canadian colonialism and affirm the right to self-determination of Indigenous communities, the people of Quebec, and of oppressed peoples everywhere. We seek to be a part of the struggles against all forms of oppression and to learn from them.
Canada was founded on the displacement and genocide of Indigenous peoples. This brutality and violence are not just our history, but continue to this day. This meeting is taking place on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Vandite peoples, and is governed by the dish with one spoon when comes covenant.
Ontario. We all eat out of this dish and share this territory with only one spoon. We have the collective responsibility as settlers, as guests, as visitors, alongside Indigenous people, to tend to this place and not to leave the dish empty.
Spring members believe settlers on Turtle Island have a special obligation not only to protect the lands we occupy in the spirit of the treaties, which have also too often been violated and ignored, but also to stand in solidarity with the resistance of Indigenous nations across Turtle Island and to join them in dismantling colonial violence.
We want to acknowledge the connection between the violence of colonialism in Canada, anti-Black racism, Islamophobia, xenophobia, and other forms of white supremacy perpetuated by the Canadian state.
And finally, we want to be clear that criticisms of states and their governments are not a condemnation of the people who live under that state, regardless of whether the criticisms are directed at the practices of Canada, the US, Israel, or any other capitalist state. For that reason, we do not equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism.
Thank you, comrades. And thank you again, everybody, for joining the opening meeting of the Red October Conference, organized by the Spring Socialist Network. If you're posting to social media this evening, we encourage you to use the conference hashtag #RedOctober2025. You can also tag Spring on all platforms using @SpringMagCA. So let's begin. This year has been a long one for workers, and especially for those involved in the struggle. The capitalist trade war at the beginning of 2025 posed a serious economic threat to workers everywhere. The resulting nationalism, militarism, and the election of Mark Carney have ushered in a new wave of austerity across the Canadian states. Meanwhile, the genocide in Gaza raged on. Even now, Israel continues violating the ceasefire agreement, all with our government's funding and support. As we take on the rise of the far right and its anti-immigrant agenda, a worsening cost of living crisis, and the existential threat of climate change, just to name a few issues, we're faced with many questions. How do we build a better world? How do we build the confidence of workers, our family, our friends, our neighbors, to stand up and fight back? What is our strategy to resist oppression and create a new world in place of the old? These are just some of the questions we're trying to answer this weekend at Red October. Over the next 2 days, we invite you to join us for 24 talks organized across 6 courses, along with our Labor Caucus and Strike Solidarity School. And now, I'm going to pass it over to Sarah to lead tonight's discussion.
Thank you, Rahima. So tonight's meeting is called Getting Organized for a Better World. And it features leading figures in our movement who will share with us experiences from organizing on the ground, some of the key struggles over the last year, and how we can organize together as the working class. And I really want to underscore that piece because it's not just any sort of progressive movement and social justice movement. It's a very specific way we're going to talk about these struggles. And the main link here is how we strategically focus it in a way that it empowers the working class, and it raises their confidence, and it builds power on the ground. So at this time, I'd like to introduce tonight's speakers. Our first speaker is Chiara Padovani, who is a social worker and community organizer. Please give a round of applause for Chiara. Chiara founded the York South-Weston Tenant Union to build tenant power. Over the years, the York South-Weston Tenant Union has prevented hundreds of evictions, saved thousands of tenants money on their rent, got repairs done, and has just won Toronto's largest rent strike in 4 high-rise buildings. Next, we have Nigel Barriffe, who is the Vice President of the Elementary Teachers of Toronto and the Board Chair of the Urban He is a member of the Toronto and York Region Labor Council and a singer-songwriter. He champions justice, peace, and love through activism, music, and community organizing across Toronto and beyond. So thank you, Nigel, for being here. Our next speaker will be Yadollahi, who is a trade unionist, organizer, and the president of CUPE Local 79. For those of you who don't know, because I know a lot of people are coming from outside of Toronto here, CUPE Local 79 is the largest union local in the country, representing roughly 30,000 workers with the city of Toronto. Earlier this year, Newaz actually led CUPE 79 through a contract negotiation that won several major demands, including an end to minimum wage work for municipal workers in Toronto. And finally, we have our very own Deena Newaz, who is Deena is a spring member, and that's all you need to know. But actually, she's also a trade unionist, a researcher, and again, I guess a member of Spring based in Toronto. Previously, she was the president and steward at CAPE Local 511, representing federal public servants. She also brings years of experience advocating for. Give a round of applause for all our panelists. Ju- Just a bit of on the format. Uh, each of our panelists will get 10 minutes to share the reflection. And I want to apologize in advance if I cut you off at the 10-minute mark, but I promise you, you will get all the chance to expand on your points later, because this is a discussion at the end of the day. So we will, after the presentations are done, we will go have a collective discussion. I'll take
knocking on doors, and we're talking like high-rise buildings in the inner suburbs of Toronto. It's just the slog of the everyday crisis that people are facing to pay the bills and get through. And so that is a big barrier for folks to take the time and be able to actually focus on organizing for change when they're struggling just to get by. And it's both like a big barrier, but it's also an opportunity, because just like you're going to talk to any renter in the city or in this province, they're going to tell you that the rent is too damn high. And everything that they're doing to pay that rent is taking up. However, it's also an opportunity for us, because we all are feeling it. Like it's this in my circles and like all these things like, whoa, like you're this and what? And so where do I think we should put our focus? Like how I think we beat this like rise of like this right wing wave that's kind of like really insidious, right, into our communities is we've got to double down on the organizing because people, man, I don't know, I feel like there's people want to be part of something and we just really have to get to them first. I know that might be really naive or kind of like whatever, but I really do believe that there are a lot of people out there ripe for like including into our movements. And sure, they're not going to pass like a purity test. You're not going to be the perfect organizer or activist at the beginning, but we got to be a welcoming kind of movement for them and just like bring them along because I guarantee like people have surprised me in our union and have really been game changers in terms of getting more people involved and rallying their communities. And we just really, really have to double down on the organizing. I don't think there's any like special hardcore like magic pill campaign that'll like solve fascism and the growing rise of fascism in our communities. However, I do think having those one-on-one conversations, in our case, the door knocking with our neighbors, that is the best, what's the thing that's like the cure, like an anecdote? What is it? No, antidote. Yes, it's like the thing that'll help cure it, man. We just gotta keep talking, doing those one-on-one conversations with our folks and pulling them into our movements. Because I think people are really, really hungry for that. COVID and the isolation that came with COVID was disastrous. And it left a lot of people isolated and lonely. And there's a certain, I don't know, it's really beautiful when you see that your movement is building community and people are like feel like want to be part of it. My last thing is having a movement that is fun and like it's got to be up there, man. We got to have fun. When I think about some of the things that are the most effective at getting large numbers of people out to the same thing, it is in my kind of background, it's church, going to church, and it is going to sporting events. Both of those things can be very fun. And they bring a lot of people out. So I think there's just some things that we need to remember that we're always fighting because there is so much to fight for and so much at stake. But we got to remember in our movements to be like fun so that people want to be part of our club, I guess. So that's my like word barf of an introduction for everyone. And then I can't wait to start organizing against Ford's war on tenants because that's definitely what he just started. So I will pass it on back to.
Thank you so much, Chiara. So I guess the solution is to be fun. Yeah, like that was easy. Yeah, that's be fun, have fun. I'm gonna now pass. I should ask Deena to pass the mic to Nigel. So I can keep this mic with me, if that's okay.
All right. Thank you very much. And, yeah, uh, yeah, good evening. Like, my name is Nigel. I'm going to start the time. Yeah, I'm a public school teacher with the Toronto District School Board and the vice president of the Elementary Teachers of Toronto. And we are the largest teacher local in Canada, fourth largest in North America. And before I do begin, and even though we did do a land acknowledgement, which was absolutely beautiful, um, I do want to ground myself here. I speak tonight as a Black man in the society. Um, a descendant of people brought here against their will, whose enslavement helped build this country. So when I call myself a settler, I carry that tension, knowing my presence is shaped by forced displacement, and my responsibility now is to stand with Indigenous peoples for land, water, and sovereignty. Because liberation for I was born in Kingston. Yeah. I was born in Kingston, Jamaica, and I came here as a baby. My parents started in Rexdale, saved enough money to buy a townhouse in Rexdale. My mom worked in a hospital kitchen. My dad, those jobs meant braces, school, and hope. Before teaching, I did time on Bay Street, selling big computers working in banks. I saw how greed gets rebranded as efficiency. Eventually, I left that world and became a classroom teacher back in Rexdale at the same theater school I went to as a kid.
towards a real serious social union model that is run by, for rank and file workers, and is connected to other grassroots organizations that are not necessarily unionized across the city, across this province, and across this country. One of the things that has been highlighted for me over the past couple of years is how much we chant in the streets, how much we say the right things, and how little that has impacted our material outcomes. And the reason for that is that there is no connection across labor all the way to the top. CUPE is, it just, it does this weird thing, right? OPSU, education workers, teachers unions, public sector workers. For the life of me, I can't understand why we keep talking and why we haven't already shut this fucking country down. We can keep saying the right things and we can keep raising our fists in the air, but if we don't actually take the most valuable thing, which is our labor, off the front lines, we will continue to be used and abused in the same way that we have been. Our wages will continue to fall behind inflation, and the only people that will pay for this are the working class people of this country, who, by the way, carry it on their backs. Barriers, okay, we can have a whole day about barriers. I'll just name a few things. We have moved so deep into business unionism. The people, the vast majority of workers who are too exhausted, too busy, trying to make ends meet, to know what it even is to be a social union. When we started, when we came into office in January of 2024, one of the first commitments that we made was to give Local 79 back to not 30, but almost now 32,000 workers. And that required shifting away from this idea that there's a few elected executives that get to make decisions for 32,000 workers without having a clue what they actually need. And this was decades of cozy relationships by leadership at Local 79 with the employer. Those relationships do not work. They diminish the real outcomes of workers every single day in their workplaces. Every time you hear a worker say, I actually don't have a problem with that manager, or that manager or supervisor is really nice. Chances are that that same manager and supervisor is not really nice to 99% of the other workers. So it was really important for us to come in and create and structure Local 79 under a model that was true organizing. It has not been easy. It has been it is real organizing, one-on-one conversations that continue to build out a web, rely on a few things. You cannot be someone who's committed to hoarding power. Organizing means sharing your power and making space for everyone else to get involved equally. The other thing is convincing people that this is eventually going to yield the outcomes that they're looking for, but it's not going to be overnight. Because building a movement that is real and that is rooted and that is grounded takes time, takes patience, and it takes a whole lot of effort. Who in this room has had to have one-on-one conversations in any capacity for an extended period of time? Okay, you all needed either therapy or a long vacation afterwards, okay? It is real hard work. Because what we're listening to is not people's stories about how great they feel, it's about their struggles. And that absorbing that and finding out where it needs to sit and live and what you're actually going to do with that is hard work. So we shouldn't anticipate outcomes that are immediate, but we should expect to be in it for the long haul. We also committed to moving away from having that cozy relationship. A lot of people will be like, But you're not a progressive mayor. It's neither here nor there. At the end of the day, they are the employer. So we knew that we were going to go into bargaining. What do most unions do? They go in a door, they go in a room, they close the door behind them, and have some conversation and come out a few months later and say you should ratify this agreement. The first thing we told the city of Toronto was you can take your confidentiality agreement and shove it. We are not going to sign a confidentiality agreement. Every proposal that we put on the table and every one of your proposals that you put on the table will be uploaded on a portal for every single 30,000 member of Local 79 to see. Because what we don't really think about is nobody knows what they need more than the people on the front line. So give me one good reason why we would keep the people whose material outcomes are connected to the process that you're going through out of that process. It doesn't make sense. I didn't have a PhD in bargaining when I took it on. And we ended up with the best contract that Local 79 has ever seen in its history. I did not do that by myself. It took an entire team of organizers. It took a local and took a membership who bought into what we were doing and understood that it was important. Participating in things that are open and being transparent also comes with accountability. You have to be ready to answer hard questions and to be held accountable by folks. You also, I think one of the things we also need to remember is we also get to hold leadership accountable. So like I said, just because you have a more progressive mayor, it doesn't mean that you don't hold them accountable. Because if you don't hold them accountable, you continue to diminish our own outcomes. So I want us just to remember that. I got 2 minutes. I'm going to try to say the things that I need to say. Within our own union, it was extremely difficult to convince people. Yes, we eliminated minimum wage, but that was extremely hard to do. Not because of what was happening on the bargaining table, but because of what was happening inside our union. Well, why do we care about those part-time workers? Who cares? Why are you taking from us to give to them? Those were the conversations that were happening inside. And until we really embody this idea that we are all working class people and our struggles are connected to one another in a myriad of ways, and they all intersect and they all overlap. So let me just say, let's start having the conversation inside. Let's start to build and have these difficult conversations and not pretend like we got it all figured out in here. Okay, because when there is workers who are making $60 an hour, don't understand the plight of that single mother who's working 3 jobs and getting paid minimum wage at the City of Toronto, that we have an internal problem. We have a working class problem. And we cannot start to answer the bigger questions about how we organize until we actually recognize that these are the things that we need to address internally. And how do we organize and have conversations about those things? I'm out of time, but hopefully we'll get to talk a little bit more about these things as we go along.
Deena, just take it away. Perfect, thank you. So this is tricky because I have notes down. Yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to start by saying just how rare it is to have spaces like this, especially on the left, to talk about what it feels like to be organizing and be on the left. And that's not because we don't like to have sober analysis or be really honest with each other. Maybe sometimes that's also part of the issue. But it's because we're constantly living in crisis after crisis. It sometimes feels like on the left that we're on a hamster wheel moving from one crisis to another. And it ranges, and it's the same things packed up in new crisis, new bills. Duckford does something, Carney does something else, Trump does something. And it really feels like from the cost of living crisis to housing crisis to genocide, occupation, imperialism, worsening climate crisis, it doesn't just feel like the precarity of our lives, but a real precarity of our souls, where it feels like not only having to live through it, but witness all of this horrible shit, waking up for the last 2.5 years and continuing to do so, watching sort of what's happening in Gaza. It's impossible. And it's under these conditions that we have to also organize. So that's why it feels so hard to have these conversations on the left. So, as Sarah mentioned, I'm a Spring member. For the last decade, I've been organizing in various capacities, and I've made so many mistakes. And I have done so much wrong, from community organizing to being elected leadership in my union to even buying into the nonprofit industrial complex and thinking my nonprofit that was funded by corporate donors could change the world. But all of that to say that everything that I point out today are mistakes I've made, but I've also had comrades along the way, as well as movements that showed me otherwise. So before I go into answering those two excellent questions that have already been answered in incredible ways, I want a bit of time, if that's okay, Sarah, to talk a little bit about Spring. We are all here. We are organized socialists here at Spring Magazine, and we're putting this third edition of Red October. And I think it's only fair if I share a bit about who we are and what is it that we really do and why, and then that'll link into some of the challenges we face as Spring Socialists. So we're a small socialist, revolutionary socialist organization. We're just under 200 members across branches all across Canada, from Vancouver to Halifax. And through clear strategy, we do believe as the working class, we can have a disproportionate impact, the kind of impact that all the panelists have talked about. And what do we do? It's quite simple. We promote self-activity within the class. We learn by doing. It feels simple enough. We gain skills, internalize lessons. We grow in confidence through participation, all the things that we need as the working class. And we promote mass politics, and that simply means reaching the largest number of people possible, and most importantly, inviting them into our movements that we are rooted in. Not just the ones on the left, not just the ones who have all the right politics, but the real task of us as Spring Socialists is to really go into these movements, be in these movements, truly rooted, and find the people who are on sidelines, people who are not yet convinced, people who are watching by and hoping to build their confidence along the way and inspire them to join us the next time and the time after that and the time after. And that's why the way we do things, including this panel and this conference over the next few days, is really building that model of from below. We don't believe in experts. Like Nas said, you don't need to have a PhD in bargaining or a PhD in organizing to do the work that we do. It's really believing in the capacity of the rank and file to really sort of create a world in our own image, centering equity, because capitalism needs racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, all of that to survive and to get bold, and we must constantly be fighting in everything that we do. And then finally, revolutionary journalism. Many of you might have found us through Spring Magazine, because if you haven't been convinced before, the last 2 years has shown just how morally bankrupt media is, and it's not going to sort of do justice to the movements that we need. And that's why we have our magazine, we have our podcast, and we have everything else in between. So now I want to go a little bit about why Spring orients to the working class, and I promise I'll get to some barriers. We orient to the working class not because the working class is special or because it's a moral issue, but because it's a strategic one. And it's only because we know that the working class, all of us in this room that work a job, whatever it is, we have the radical and revolutionary potential and have always had it in history. And if you don't believe me, you can come to any of the sessions that are organized tomorrow to find out just how to overthrow capitalism. But reaching the potential of our class takes a lot of work. And that's why we orient ourselves to the working class and we do the work that we do. And our task at Spring is to build people's confidence to act, but also to build movements that advances sort of our collective action. And I think it's important, and I mentioned this before I get into some of the challenges, is because sometimes knowing something is wrong, like our rent is too high, our bosses are really messing with us, and having all the right ideas as to what needs to happen can be paralyzing without having this kind of working class confidence and this sort of other comrades to learn and do it with. And the reason it is the way it is, the reason that we focus so much on building working class confidence, we say it all the time, and it's important because the system that we live in, from the day we are born, from the day we step our foot in kindergarten, we are told that it's bosses, it's presidents, it's prime ministers, it's bankers, and it's leaders who run the world. And we are just here to cheer them on. We are here to follow the rules and orders, and that we witness history as workers. We never really make it. And that it's competition, it's fighting with each other. That's how we get ahead. And we just have to look after our family and our sort of own nuclear family at the expense of others. Everything around us reinforces that that's how we get ahead, and that's how things ought to be. So it's no surprise that even on the left we see these tendencies where we constantly feel the need to rely on experts and big leaders and big names, celebrity writers, even union leaders, but never believe in the capacity of just ordinary workers who give legitimacy to these leaders that we covet and sometimes fetishize. So it's important not to sort of fall into this dominant trap of there's some people who do the leading and the rest of us watch by and we never take center stage, because it truly miscalculates where our power lies as the class. And that's why I think it's important to share sort of why we orient ourselves the way we do. And that also leads to a challenge that the barrier that many of you have already pointed out. And I'll say the same, but in a slightly different way, which is the biggest barrier that I've encountered within Spring and also outside organizing through Spring is the problem of substitutionism. And I'll tell you what that is. Very simply, what that means is having good demands, progressive demands, but the expectation that only a few leaders will carry them out. And that it basically, what does that feel like? What does that look like in our movement? It feels like relying on experts, top-down structures, rather than democratic processes to build worker power. And that also feels like waiting on the right words, the right slogans, that once we train all the right people, then they will be ready to carry the important work we need, as opposed to believing that we are all capable of doing it. And it goes back to sort of what we expect from the day we are born. And we see this all the time. I've seen it so much on the left in the unions I've been a part of. And it also takes center stage in sort of electoralism, right? When we see sort of what happens when we think about electoral politics, that power lies in parliament or Congress or elected bodies. And instead of a mass party that's run and informed and led by masses, that there's a current division of labor in how we do electoral politics, whether it's for the NDP, whether it's in your city, wherever it is, that there's a division of labor which essentially looks like this, that there are the masses, that's all of us in this room, and we are only ever called upon to vote or to campaign, to sort of make sure that the candidate or the person gets elected. And then when the elections are over, all of the work should be conducted by those who were elected. They will run the perfect program, and we get to sit back and we get to watch them. And there is no accountability to the base that got them elected in the first place. And then the class has to sit back and see what happens. And the problem with this is that what this leads to, and the reason I talk about this problem in particular, is that it leads to a particular tendency of chasing polls, chasing what works at polls instead of trying to change polls. And by that, what I mean is the goal being constantly trying to win votes rather than changing the hearts and minds of people who are doing the voting. So what that looks like, the problem with this is that sometimes parties, sometimes candidates become resistant to social movements and unpopular demands like support for Palestine, a wealth tax, strong public services, because if the main goal is to win the election and then run your really great leftist agenda, then you always have to orient yourself to do things that does not cost you votes. Right. So that's a particular tendency that are an example of substitutionism that comes to mind, and I'm sure you all have experience of it in various ways. Another example, and the reason I mentioned this electoral example is given that we've had 2 elections this year, we have another one, is that it leads to an increasingly disillusioned, depoliticized, and demobilized working class. That's what it leads to, where the bureaucracy, like Nas mentions, becomes more and more out of touch with its own members. And that is an antithetic to sort of the kind of confidence we need to be building as a class. And we'd also see this sometimes in the left, gatekeeping of who gets to make decisions, secret organizing behind closed doors, where the class is ever called, the masses are only ever called to become bodies to block things, but never seen as comrades with minds and hearts that can be won over to do the decision making as well. And in all of these scenarios, workers are not seen as central agents to make change. And To that, the last point I want to make is around, well, what does this point towards? There's a clear sort of tension between leadership and class confidence. Is that leadership is just simply good leadership. Even the best of us in this room, just being in a leadership position without mass participation is not enough. Electing the right people cannot do much unless we have the capacity to build inside and outside unions in our social movements, to create the political currents to sustain, to challenge those leadership, and also to be the wind in their sails. And I know I'm sort of running out of time, so I can give an example of what that looks like. But the last thing I want to say is that if you have been in a union or you're in a union with sometimes the best leadership, even then the unions can break your heart, and unions break our hearts all the time because the best leaders and even the worst ones sometimes cannot deliver what we are not ready to fight for ourselves. And that's why we see unions, the best of the class, the best leaders breaking our heart. And I always say this, that in this room, one of you tomorrow could be the leader of the NDP or the Unifor or whatever it is. But without the widest layer of organizing activity within your membership, you do not have sort of the mandate to push the kind of future that we're all trying to paint here. So what should be a strategic focus to wrap up? It's quite simple, and it can mention in different ways. How do we think about building local leadership and independent mechanisms that go beyond elected leaders, staff at unions? How do we create this political currents that just brings not unionized workers, but everyone really into, whether that's tenant organizing, sort of Palestine organizing groups within your sort of neighborhoods, whatever that looks like. And that can only happen if we exercise this key skill through confidence, which is talking to each other, doing one-on-one conversations, changing minds, meeting people where they are at. If people are at a rally for some kind of, I don't know, something you don't necessarily fully agree with, it's okay to go and try to talk to folks. We need different types of power that can all reinforce each other. And then the final thing that sometimes gets lost in all of this that Nigel brought up as well is sort of taking that extra time to build confidence through one-on-one conversations. They are so hard, and I know many of us have done them, but there is truly no way to do them. There is no shortcuts to do them, and even under pressure, because when we take shortcuts, when we are impatient with our colleagues, our friends, our class, that's when we that's when we see substitutionism, that the rest of us can't get where I am in my thought. I can't wait for these others. People are dying, so I'm just going to do it by myself, and I'm going to tell everyone to join me. And when they join me, I'm going to shame them because they must not care. And this kind of stuff, I felt and experienced this, and it sucks, and it does not build confidence. But what I'm here to say today, after organizing in spring for the past 3 years, is that it's important to build confidence, but we also need to have the confidence to do this. And the kind of politics we have is a kind politics. It's a human politics. It's not built around shame. It's not built around purity tests. I believe I can win people. You can all do it. And that's the whole point, right? We want the world to be better, not just for ourselves or our neighborhood or our building. We want it for all of us. So the strategic focus always remains building confidence of the class in the midst of all this crap we are told, and not just make demands of leadership, but what can we do to change the political terrain? So the question I leave for us as we discuss is, if we are in search of a shared strategy here, what does it look like to build class confidence in CUPE 79? In ETFF, in your sort of tennis groups, if you're a part of, in your neighborhood, and what are we doing to build these independent groups wherever we are rooted? You don't have to leave where you are. You can be exactly where you are and be this kind of socialist that truly can win and bring the widest layer of class. And you never have to get a PhD or become an elected leader if you want to do this as well. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Deena and Nigel and Chiara. Those were amazing presentations, very insightful, and lots for us to think about and chew on, not just tonight, but also throughout tomorrow. So I will now open this segment is for open discussion. I will take hands. So if you want to contribute or ask questions, you can raise hands. I'll call on you. I will prioritize an equity-based speakers list, so I might not call on you in order. I will try to prioritize my best to prioritize women, people of color, and first-time speakers. And I will also just take a couple of hands give our panelists an opportunity to respond, and then come back to the floor again. We might, if time permits, we might be able to do it maybe like 2 rounds of hands and stuff. Okay. All hands up so I can see you.